Top five, top five, top five.
So then we'll go back with another video. I'm Strange Wing. He's Nate. And he's going to tell us how our top fives work.
Yeah, so today we are doing our top 5 favorite underrated directors since he didn't want to tell you what we were doing. And how we do our top 5 list is one of us will do 5 and 4, the other do 5 and 4, 3-2, 3-2. We'll trade off number ones. We also have something we call the Zemeckis rule, which, Back to the Future, basically if one of us, or if we both have the same person, in this case on our list, but one of us has it 2 spots or higher on their list, that person will call the Zemeckis rule when they hear it called by the person who had it lower on their list, and it just means we're going to wait to talk about it till we get to it on their list, because obviously they care about it a little bit more, and you don't want to hear us talk about stuff twice.
At number 5 on my list, we have, I don't know how to say his name. It's going to be, it's going here.
Shut up, stupid!
The Lobster.
But
I thought that film was incredibly funny.
yeah, it's great.
Amazing film. And then you got Killing a Sacred Deer, which goes in a totally different direction, but keeping the same tone and like darkness and whatnot. And it's just like such a creepy movie. And it's so weird because things happen you can't explain. So you got 2 all-star pitches, and then he comes out with the favorite. Again, something totally different, but still in the same realm with the tone and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And that was my least favorite of the 3, but still an excellent movie nonetheless.
Yeah.
I mean, he has a few others, but those are the 3 that pop out to me. And the
Yeah.
reason why he made my list of underrated directors, because whatever he comes out with next, will be at the theater to see it.
His directing style just has A24 written all over it.
Yeah, it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not.
But number 4 on my list is Richard Linklater.
That's my number 3.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Holy, same haircut. So, obviously, one of my favorite films of all time is Dazed and Confused.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite trilogy of all time is the Before trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Each film is just like 5
Yeah.
stars, 5 stars, 5 stars. Like, they keep a trilogy to be so far away but connect at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just like a very, like, he experiments with film, you know?
Right.
Those films are 10 years apart.
Mm-hmm.
Boyhood, what was that, like 15 years?
Something like that, yeah.
Insane amount of time.
Yeah.
So, I love him. Does he have a couple bad movies? Yes. I'm talking about you, the Bad News Bears remake. You're a sin to humanity. But why do you like Richard Linklater?
I agree with everything that you just said. So, and if you're even remotely familiar with our channel, you've probably heard us argue about Dazed and Confused at some point in time.
I'm surprised.
But the direction of that movie has nothing to do with my problem with it. I just don't like the subject matter or the vibe of it necessarily. But in terms of directing goes, I think it's an excellently directed film. I think why I would describe Linklater as underrated is that when people talk about him, that experimentation is pretty much all that you hear. You know, to a lot of people, Linklater's just the guy who did his experiment with the Before series or did his experiment with Boyhood. But that is definitely not the only thing that this guy is good at. I agree with you. The Bad News Bears remake is
so fucking terrible.
If you watch all those films of his, there are so many really good directing points in them outside of the fact that they are just creative and experimental in terms of film. And I feel like that's why he's underrated, is because most of the time when people talk about him, they only talk about the risks he takes with the time lapses and things like that. But my number 5, maybe a little controversial because of how new she is, but it's going to be Greta Gerwig. Absolutely snubbed this year at the Oscars. Twice. I would say 2. I know that we pretty much only have Lady Bird and Little Women to go off of, but both of those films are masterfully directed. She did get the nomination for Lady Bird, I'm pretty sure. But she's so underrated, and I think that she is going to be one of the best up-and-coming directors that we see. And since that is true, I don't understand what the point in waiting to give her the attention and respect that she deserves now is. Her and Saoirse Ronan are going to be one of the best actor-director combos of all time.
That's a fact.
Next on my list is going to be Ava DuVernay. She gets a lot of attention for her TV work, and which is all absolutely phenomenal. But she also directed Selma, and she directed a documentary called 13th. And I understand most of the time we usually just talk about theatrical things and stuff like that. 13th is on Netflix. It's a Netflix produced documentary. You should go watch it. Lots of really great information about the 13th Amendment and racism, and how even despite how old a lot of that stuff is, how it still affects the African American community today, and how they still feel effects of those things. But aside from the awesome subject matter of films like Selma and The 13th, the way that they are directed keeps your attention seamlessly. Some documentaries are just really, some of them are really engrossing. I'll give them that. Sometimes even if the subject matter is interesting, like, you can kind of like lose yourself in thought, kind of seems sidetracked along the way. 13th completely destroys that problem with documentaries for me. There was not a single point in time watching it that I wasn't glued to the television, waiting to see what information I was going to get learned next and all that kind of stuff. And that is 100% because of the way that she directed it. And I feel the same way about Selma.
My third most underrated director of all time is going to be Rob Reiner. So I'm just going to let the films speak for themselves.
Yeah.
You have Spinal Tap, the greatest parody movie of all time, some say.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have All the President's Men. All the President's Men.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different movie.
Yeah.
And then you got Stand By Me, coming of age movie, one of the best, classic. Then you have Princess Bride, cult classic to classic, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of love in this movie. Those are back-to-back years he's doing this.
I know.
2 classes back-to-back years. He went on vacation in 88. 88. And then when Harry Met Sally, one of my top 5 most favorite movies of all time, he came out with 89. And then he was like, I did a nice rom-com. What will I do next? I'll make a crazy bitch movie. And you got Misery, like classic horror movie, Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have A Few Good Men in 92. And it's like, the same guy did all those movies?
Oh my God! Wow!
I love Kubrick films to death.
Mm-hmm.
People suck his dick because of how many genres he dives into.
Right.
All these different genres, all these classic films.
Mm-hmm.
He needs more love.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you. I think it's a great choice. He was on my short list.
I'm surprised not on yours.
Yeah.
Another person I think you should get more love is my number 2, and that is David Fincher. When you hear about all the amazing talents of our era of directors, Tarantino, Wes Anderson, he usually gets skipped over, Oh, he just does those thriller movies.
Those dark, gritty thrillers. Yeah.
And I feel like he gets skipped over for him because a lot of people say that the greatest film of the 2010s was A Social Network, directed by him.
That's true.
You have Seven, classic. Fight Club, classic. He's never made a bad movie, minus Alien 3. And that film has a little cult following in and of itself. So, even though he is kind of a one-trick pony, that pony is best at show.
My number 2 is going to be Spike Jonze. This guy directed...
What a great name.
I know,
Spike
right.
Jonze.
So he directed Her and Being John Malkovich, and those are my 2 favorite films of his. But I feel like this is just one of those cases. Honestly, I think you can compare this to the point that you were making about Fincher, in that if you kind of have like your one thing that you're really, really good at and you don't spend a lot of time diving into a ton of other genres, then people just refuse to acknowledge you as a great. And I personally disagree with that. So, yeah, all of his films are really, really quirky. They have kind of abstract ideas and thoughts to them, but they are phenomenal. And the best part about all of his films is the direction. I mean, Joaquin Phoenix is an amazing performance in Her, so I definitely don't want to take anything away from him for that. But, I mean, this guy made a movie about, like, basically being stuck in John Malkovich's thoughts. Like, that's whack. But, like, it's phenomenal. And, like, I love his directing style. I'm not saying necessarily that he needs to be regarded as one of the best directors of all time by any means, but I definitely think that he deserves a lot more respect and attention than he currently gets from the film community.
That brings us to number 1 for Strange Wings list of underrated directors. This is going to be Howard Hawks. Classic directors, hearing those names being brought up is dying off. Because there's just so much directors out there. There's so many films.
Yeah.
And, like, especially with people in their early 20s, like me. A lot of people don't know this name. Like you've heard Hitchcock, Akira Kurosawa,
Right.
Sergio Leone, stuff like that.
Welles.
Orson Welles.
Yeah.
But Howard Hawks made a ton of great films. Doesn't get brought up. Some of his films, Scarface, 100% Rotten Tomatoes, phenomenal film, better than the '83 Scarface, 80 Scarface. It's early in the morning. I'm a little off my game.
It's 12:30 in the afternoon.
I don't wake up till 3. But then you got Bring It Up, Baby. You went from a gangster film to a romantic comedy, and it's hilarious.
That
It's
is a great movie, yeah.
Only Angels Have Wings, His Girl Friday.
That's a great movie.
Red Rider, The Big Sleep.
Yeah.
Film noir. He's going on all the place. Humphrey Bogart, phenomenal that film. Rio Bravo. There's so many great films he made, so many different genres, and he's just a very skilled director. Like, would you rather go to a restaurant that may have a great, like, depending on who's cooking, the food's amazing, or would you rather go to a restaurant every single time you go there, it's amazing?
Yeah.
You know, so if you watch a Howard Hawks film, you are not going to be let down.
Yeah.
They're all great.
And, I mean, to just prove your
Great
point.
to fantastic.
To prove to your point that he's underrated, I know who Howard Hawks is, and I definitely knew he did Scarface, and I knew he did Bringing Up Baby, but I honestly had no idea that he directed any of those other movies you just said. And I love all those movies. I've seen them. So my number one, we kind of went the same route in a lot of ways on these lists, because mine is also a classic director that you just never hear anybody talk about. But mine is going to be Robert Wise. This guy directed West Side Story, Sound of Music, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and he dabbled in a bunch of horror movies that are all like, I don't watch horror, so I don't know them that well, but when I looked them up when I was doing the research for this, they all have pretty high ratings, and they're like,
What are they?
considered class. I don't remember their names. I don't like horror. I really don't like horror movies. But like, the horror community has loved his movies. And not to destroy my own point that you made about Fincher and I made about Spike Jonze, but diversity is something that plays in a lot.
It's important.
Okay, West Side Story, Best Picture winner. Sound of Music, Best Picture winner. Star Trek: The Motion Picture, not a Best Picture winner, but it is
a picture.
But it is a picture. And it is absolutely beloved by a lot of people within that sci-fi, especially the Star Trek community. I've never seen it. I'm not a huge Star Trek fan.
I haven't seen any of
But
those movies.
I did do my research, and a lot of people love that film. I mean, to take an absolutely beloved, like, classic TV series and put it on the big screen, there's a lot of pressure on that because it already has a huge fan base, and you can't mess it up or you're going to get destroyed. And he did that successfully. So it's not just that he's dabbled in a bunch of different genres, it's the diversity of the genres that he's dabbled in. I mean, to go from, like, musicals, and those two musicals are very different. One of them is about, like, a Swiss family, you know, falling in love with their new, like, nanny and then running from Nazis. And the other one is about, like, street gangs in New York, you know? Like, that's just a big jump, even though they're both musicals still. But to go from that to doing straight up sci-fi with Star Trek, and then to go from that to doing, like, authentic old school horror and do it all extraordinarily well, that takes an immense amount of talent and devotion to your craft. And I can't even tell you the last time I know you don't really watch it. I watch a lot of, like, movie YouTube. I can't tell you the last time I've ever heard anybody mention this dude's name, and it's a shame because he's phenomenal.
But if there's any directors you think are underrated, tell us down low in the comment section. Like, share, and subscribe.